Some pictures tell a story. This one screamed a confession. Last time we found this photo, and suddenly the ghost in this house had a story. But the look on my husband's face told a much darker one. It wasn't just jealousy, it was possession. The look of a man who would rather destroy something beautiful than ever risk letting it go. In that instant, Sarah's diary wasn't just a sad story anymore. It was evidence. And Daniel Moreau, the man in the photo, wasn't just her lover. He was our only witness. We had 14 days until he arrived in town. 14 days to become detectives, living under the same roof as our prime suspect. And that's how our new normal began. The three of us, me, Leo, and now Chloe, huddled over that photograph in Leo's room like it was a war map. And then, the sound of footsteps in the hall. Michael. We'd scramble, hide the photo, hearts pounding in unison. We'd hold our breath, watching his shadow pass under the door, a silent predator in his own home. Today, you're going to see just how fragile that new alliance is, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And I was looking right at her. And while we try to hold it together, the game changes. Michael becomes the watcher. He can feel the shift in the air, and he starts hunting for our secret, which pushes us to make our most dangerous move yet, a covert operation to break into his office, a frantic race against time to find a paper trail. And what we find is a bombshell, a single piece of paper that proves his alibi for the day Sarah died was a complete and total lie. But getting away with it is another story. And it all leads to a heart-stopping interrogation where the fate of our investigation, maybe even our lives, rests on the shoulders of one 16-year-old girl. And her choice will change the entire game. Let's get into it. Our new alliance was 3 people strong. But they say a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And I was looking right at her. Chloe was sitting on the edge of Leo's bed, her eyes wide, looking like someone had just told her the sky was green and water was dry. She was processing an information overload, one that would make a supercomputer crash, let alone a 16-year-old girl. Leo, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak. He looked right at her, his voice low and serious. "You can't tell anyone," he said, "especially not your dad." Chloe just shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. She stammered, I don't get it. So, you think Michael hurt your mom? That's insane." She was right. It did sound insane. And seeing the sheer panic in her eyes, I knew I had to handle this carefully. I knelt down in front of her, trying to keep my own voice calm. "We don't know what to think, honey. That's the honest truth. That's why we have to be so careful. We're just gathering information, trying to understand what really happened. Can you do that for us? Can you just watch and listen and keep this just between the 3 of us?" She looked from my face to Leo's, a silent, desperate ping-pong match of trust. She finally gave a small, jerky nod. But her agreement didn't make me feel relieved. It made me feel terrified. And here's a lesson they don't teach you in parenting books. The thing about asking a kid to keep a secret this big is that you're not just giving them a piece of information. You're giving them a burden, a heavy, terrifying weight that they are in no way equipped to carry. I had just handed my daughter a lit match in the middle of a fireworks factory and asked her not to drop it. We were so focused on the weak link within our tiny circle of trust, so worried about her cracking under the pressure, that we didn't realize our hushed tones and secret meetings were already creating ripples, and someone else in the house was starting to feel the vibrations. We were so focused on the weak link within our tiny circle of trust, so worried about Chloe cracking under the pressure, that we didn't realize our hushed tones and secret meetings were already creating ripples, and someone else in the house was starting to feel the vibrations. The game changed. My husband, the meticulous architect, became the watcher. It wasn't one big, obvious thing. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the house that made the hair on my arms stand up. He started moving through our home, not like he lived there, but like he was investigating it. His tactics weren't loud or obvious. They were quiet, casual, and absolutely terrifying. He'd accidentally walk into Leo's room, supposedly looking for a tape measure, forcing Leo to slam his laptop shut so fast I'm surprised it didn't break. Then he'd just stand there for a beat too long, a pleasant smile on his face, his eyes scanning the room, trying to read the ghost of what was on the screen just a second before. He'd find me in the kitchen and start asking these little probing questions. Who was that you were just texting? You seem a little distracted today. Everything okay at the shop? They sounded like normal, caring husband questions, but they felt like a police interrogation. Every casual inquiry was a test, and I felt like I was failing all of them. His most strategic move, though, was aimed at Chloe. He'd single her out, trying to pull her into his orbit, asking about her friends, about school, being the fun, interested stepdad. I could see what he was doing. He was trying to isolate the weakest link, to make her his ally, his informant. And that's the lesson you learn when you're living with a watcher. You start to see traps everywhere. Every coincidence feels like a plan. Every question feels like an accusation. It's a game of high-stakes domestic chess, and we were so busy trying not to get checkmated that we weren't making any moves of our own. I knew we couldn't just keep playing defense, waiting for one of us to slip up. We were running out of time. We had to go on the offensive, and if he was a hunter in our house, then we had to go hunting in his den. Daniel Moreau was an artist, all passion and color and beautiful chaos. But my husband, Michael, is an architect. He builds his life like he builds his houses, with straight lines, rigid rules, and a place for everything. And we realized if there were any other skeletons in his closet, they wouldn't just be rattling around. They'd be filed, alphabetically. So we came up with a plan. A risky, stupid, straight out of a spy movie plan. We would wait until he left for one of his long site visit meetings, and we would break into his home office. In the hallway, we had a whispered, high-stakes huddle. Leo, who was quickly becoming our mission commander, laid it out. We need to look for old project files, planners, anything from around the time Mom died. And then, all eyes turned to Chloe. Her mission was in some ways the hardest. She was our lookout, our canary in the coal mine. Chloe, I said, trying to sound a lot more confident than I felt. You just need to keep him on the phone if he calls. Ask him about his day, the weather, anything. Just buy us time. She looked at us, her face pale, and for a second I thought she was going to refuse. I could see the war in her eyes. Loyalty to her manipulative father, fear of her potentially dangerous stepfather, and just a whole lot of
How did this become my life? And then she took a deep breath and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. And that's the thing about a crisis. It doesn't just reveal who your enemies are. It forges your allies in the most unexpected ways. We were asking her to lie to one father figure to potentially expose another. It was an impossible choice for a kid, and she chose us. So we waited. We watched the clock. And the moment we heard his car pull out of the driveway, our little operation began. Stepping into his office felt like stepping into the mind of my enemy. Everything was perfectly ordered, cold, and calculated. There were no family photos on his desk, no little personal trinkets, just blueprints, steel rulers, and rows of filing cabinets, labeled with a precision that was borderline obsessive. And the clock was ticking. Our movements were quiet, almost reverent as we started our search. Leo, our mission commander, knew what to look for. Old planners, project binders, anything dated from the year his mother died. The soft shh of paper sliding out of a manila folder sounded like a scream in the silent room. My heart was pounding, a steady, terrified rhythm against my ribs. And then, my phone, which I'd set on the corner of his desk, vibrated with a buzz so violent I nearly jumped out of my skin. I snatched it up. It was Chloe. She said, "He's on his way home. He said he forgot something. You have maybe 5 minutes." 5 minutes? In the normal world, 5 minutes is the time it takes to make a cup of tea. In this room, it felt like 5 seconds. The methodical search was over. Our careful, quiet movements devolved into a frantic, clumsy race. My hands started to shake so badly I could barely read the labels on the files. The smell of old paper and my own fear filled my lungs. And that's the terrifying lesson you learn in a moment like this. People who build such perfect, orderly worlds around themselves, the walls are usually there for a reason. They're built to hide the biggest, ugliest messes. I was frantically flipping through a planner, my mind a complete blur, when Leo, who was a few feet away, suddenly went completely still. He had stopped searching. He was just staring at a single file he held in his hands.
My own mind was a frantic blur of paper and panic. I was just grabbing at anything, hoping for a miracle. But Leo went still. In the middle of our chaos, he froze. His frantic movements stopped. He was holding a single, unassuming manila folder. I watched him pull a piece of paper from it, his eyes scanning the page. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper, but it cut through my panic like a razor. "I always remembered what he told the police," he said, not looking at me, but at the paper in his hands. He held the folder out for me to see. The label on the tab was simple, Westwood Development. And my blood ran cold. Because I knew that story too. The unshakable alibi. The one detail that had always made him untouchable. "He told everyone he was at a site meeting in Westwood the afternoon she died," Leo said, his voice flat with a certainty that was terrifying. "But look." I leaned in, my eyes fixed on the document he was pointing to. It wasn't a contract, it wasn't a blueprint, it was a printout of an email, sent on the morning of the day she died. Let me read you the key lines. To Michael Harrison. Subject, cancellation. Dear Michael, due to the weather forecast, the Westwood site visit scheduled for this afternoon has been canceled. We will reschedule. The words just hung in the air. Time stopped. He wasn't there. He wasn't at a site meeting. He lied.
He lied to the police, he lied to his family, he lied about his alibi for the exact time his wife died. He was supposed to be miles away, but he wasn't. He was free. He was unaccounted for. And he was probably right here. And that's the coldest lesson of all. The most monumental lies, the ones that build a fortress around a person, aren't held together by intricate webs. They're held up by a single, flimsy pillar. And all it takes is one piece of paper to knock the whole thing down. The truth was in our hands, a piece of paper that changed everything. And that's when we heard it. The sound of the garage door opening.
We had the proof, but we had no time. The sound of the garage door opening wasn't just a sound. It was a countdown timer hitting 0. My mind screamed, "Run!" But Leo's mind was working. He whipped out his phone, his hands surprisingly steady, and snapped a crystal-clear photo of the email. And that's when our carefully constructed spy movie fell apart. In our frantic rush to put the file back exactly where we found it, my shaking hands fumbled. A whole stack of folders slid from my grasp, hitting the floor with a sickening slap of paper on hardwood. We weren't spies. We were a mess. We scrambled, shoving papers back into the cabinet, not caring about the order, leaving a jumbled mess of his perfect, calculated life. We bolted out of the office, pulling the door shut just as we heard Michael's keys jingle at the front door. We flattened ourselves against the wall in the hallway, 2 statues holding our breath, listening to his footsteps on the tile. He walked right past us, heading straight for his office. This was it. We were caught. My heart wasn't just pounding, it had stopped completely. We heard the door open. I squeezed my eyes shut, just waiting for the explosion, waiting for him to yell, "Who's been in here?" The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. We could hear a faint rustle of paper. Did he see the files? Could he smell our fear in the air? And then we heard the door close again. His footsteps walked away from the office and toward the stairs. We peeked around the corner. He was gone. The breath I'd been holding escaped. In a long, shaky whoosh, we had gotten away with it. Pure, dumb, blind luck. And that's the funny thing about luck. It's not a skill. It's just a breath you get to take before the next disaster. We had survived the close call with Michael, but now came the harder part, surviving the interrogation of our secret keeper.
We thought we had gotten away with it. We thought we were safe. But a man like Michael, a man who builds his life on perfect, rigid lines, he doesn't need to see the evidence. He can feel when a single thing in his perfect world is out of place. Maybe it was the faint scent of my perfume in a room I never enter. Maybe a folder was just a millimeter askew. I don't know what it was, but something had tipped him off. And he knew exactly where to apply the pressure. He didn't come for me. He didn't go after Leo. He went for the weakest link. From the top of the stairs, Leo and I watched in silent horror as he walked into the living room where Chloe was trying, and failing, to act normal. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He did something so much worse. He sat down next to her on the couch, his posture relaxed, his face a perfect mask of warm, fatherly concern. His voice was soft, full of that fake sympathy that can turn your blood to ice. He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratory whisper. "You know I'm on your side, right? Always." This was it, the final test. And it was a masterclass in manipulation. This is how predators hunt. They don't threaten. They offer protection. They isolate their target and make them feel safe, special, chosen. He was offering her a place on his team, and all she had to do was betray ours. I held my breath. Leo was completely still beside me. The fate of our entire investigation, maybe even our safety, now rested on the shoulders of a 16-year-old girl who was caught between two fathers, one who used her and one she was terrified of. She looked at him, her eyes a swirling mess of fear and confusion. And in that long, stretched-out silence, the entire world seemed to stop.
We held our breath. From the top of the stairs, Leo and I were frozen, watching. The fate of our entire investigation, maybe even our safety, rested on the shoulders of a 16-year-old girl who was caught between two fathers. Chloe looked directly into Michael's eyes. The silence in the living room was so loud, it was all I could hear. It was one of those moments that stretches, that pulls and bends time until an eternity passes in a single second. I saw the conflict warring on her face. I saw her thinking about her dad, Mark, the fun hero who had just abandoned her. I saw her looking at her stepdad, Michael, the kind man who was, maybe, a monster. Her mouth opened slightly, and I braced for impact. "Actually, yeah," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's about her ex-husband, my dad. He's been bothering her again." I think Leo and I both stopped breathing. She didn't just deny it. She didn't just deflect. She did something I never could have imagined. She took a page straight from her own father's playbook on manipulation and used it against our enemy. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It was a lie so perfect because it was rooted in truth. Mark was bothering me. It explained why I was stressed and secretive, and most importantly, it redirected all of Michael's intense, paranoid suspicion away from the secrets inside our house and aimed it like a heat-seeking missile at the enemy outside our walls. She hadn't just kept our secret. She had weaponized a new one. And in that moment, she had officially, finally, chosen a side.
In that single, heart-stopping moment, Chloe wasn't a weak link. She was our shield. She had spent her entire life learning the art of manipulation from a master, her own father, and she had just turned his greatest weapon against the monster in our house. Our fragile alliance of three wasn't fragile anymore. It had just been forged in steel. Today, we walked into the lion's den and came out with the truth. We now have proof that my husband lied about his alibi on the day his wife died. And we have a daughter who is no longer a liability, but a willing and shockingly brilliant co-conspirator. We won. But as I watched Michael's face soften, his suspicion of us melting away, replaced with a new cold anger directed at my ex-husband, a terrifying thought began to bloom in my mind. Chloe's brilliant lie may have saved us, but what happens when you solve one problem by pointing a loaded gun at another? She just aimed one predator directly at another. And what will a man like Michael do now that he believes a man like Mark is the source of all our problems? So now I have to ask you, was Chloe's lie genius or a huge mistake? Let me know what you think in the comments. And you have to subscribe and hit that bell, because in episode 9, things get explosive. Michael decides to confront Mark directly. The two alpha males in my life finally go head to head, and the fallout will be unlike anything you've seen yet. You do not want to miss this.